Ivo is with us. Ivo is a very important member of our community. He's an expert not only in BSM but in IT and knowledge management. He was the organizer of the previous conference in the Mataphorum, and he's been leading the way in all these topics that he's going to be talking to us today. So thank you very much, Ivo. And it's all yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. I would like to start by thanking Angela and all organizers. I really appreciate what you've done, especially since I know what you've done. And let me start with the platitude. Everything is connected. So I've used this a lot. But how do we organize our knowledge about these connections so that when we need them, we can retrieve them? More importantly, how do we discover new connections? How do we reliably discover new connections? How do we manage serendipity from that? So this is what I'm going to talk about. And of course, this has its own connections. If we apply it to itself, it has connections with several cybernetic theories. It has connections with all my previous talks at Mataphorum conferences. There were 3 of them in Cologne, in Hausen, and Düsseldorf. And of course, it has connections with what I do. So let me, as a way of introducing you, tell you a few things about that. I worked in different capacities in the last 27 years, but what was common all the time was my interest in knowledge and systems. And that interest was in all 3 levels: personal, organizational, and societal. And so in this matrix, I worked in all these 6 areas, but mostly in these 4, and mostly in the middle. So on the right is my work as a consultant enterprise architect, on the left as an enterprise data advisor and trainer. I provide services related to semantic technologies and knowledge graphs and so on, but mostly in the middle, and mostly for big organizations, not as big as the mobility company from yesterday, but still quite sizable, from 10 to 40,000 people. In the last few years, I sort of focused on area that wasn't so covered. By the way, there are 2 books in these areas. That is personal knowledge systems. I'm quite passionate about that topic, but I continued working on the rest because my object of research actually helped me increase my productivity. So I was able to do more while actually researching more on this topic. And in addition, in all these areas, there are always very tough questions. So we need some kind of our own variety amplifiers. So a good personal knowledge system actually supports all of them. And if that is the case, so one of the claims is, yes, since we have so many complex problems, we need powerful variety amplifiers, and a personal knowledge system can be that, not the one that we design, but the one that we grow well. And this can improve tremendously the way you think, work, and collaborate. And it serves as a tool for thought, generally. Tools for thought are very important because if we need to solve complex problems, we need better and different kind of thinking. A classical example is the Hindu-Arabic numerals. They just enabled new kind of thinking that was not possible working with the Latin ones. Not only because of the expressivity. Yes, the position of each digit changes the value of the digit and all these kind of nice things. But they just enabled new kind of thinking. And if it was all that, I wouldn't bother you with it. What is more interesting, that such a system, interestingly, can be a viable system. And I'm saying this not metaphorically and not mystically, but very seriously. So the plan is first to go quickly to the history of personal knowledge management. It's a very interesting history, but we won't have time for that, so I'll just follow a particular trend that maybe is not well spotted. Then, something about personal knowledge graphs. I believe a systemic way of managing this requires that the structure is a graph. And then about the viability. So, about the history of personal knowledge management. I think to make it a bit more interesting, we are now on the island where pub quizzes are in the culture. So let's make it like a quiz. My first question is, what is the first information technology for personal knowledge management? Pencil. Okay.
Good memory. Good memory.
Well, something external, something that you work with, something from the environment. Sorry? Yes, but a bit more advanced than that. A bit more advanced concretely to that you, because you can write many things, but something related to your personal knowledge, it appears in history as a specific tool for managing personal knowledge for the first time. Sorry? No, because you can do it also for other things. Close, close.
Conversation.
Sorry?
Conversation.
Technology. Sorry? Right, well, these were commonplace books. These were books where people gathered thoughts, quotations, summaries, prayers, and they experienced very interesting Renaissance, during Renaissance. Basically, they were something old, I think already during Aristotle had that, but during the Renaissance, they sort of first spread a lot, and then they changed their function, actually exacted their function. You know about exaptations like this periodicity of certain, where the same kind of structure is used with a different function, like the classical example is the bird feathers that they developed first for temperature regulation and then exacted for flight control. And something similar happened here because they first appeared as a memory aid. And then the same device exacted as a secondary memory. So, from something supporting memorizing, they evolved to something supporting forgetting. By the way, they spread so much that there was a methodology how to use them. Any idea who wrote that methodology? A famous English philosopher. I think it was 17th century. No. There was only one such book. Not. Sorry? No. Alright, that was from John Locke, and this methodology is fully preserved. It was used by many scholars. Later on, it was even used by Charles Darwin, by the way. But the Renaissance was the time for increased freedoms, increased political, artistic freedoms, and some people discovered that it's much better to have separate nodes, because you can rearrange it, and you can grow your collection from different places. And I think Konrad Gessner, a Swiss astronomer, was the first to suggest that. But Thomas Harrison was the one who actually invented the device. He called it Arc of Studies. That was a wooden cabinet where different cards, small paper slips, can be attached to hooks and rearranged. And it's very interesting system for actually be able to quickly find something, but also you can easily extend this system and rearrange it. More autonomy and more cohesion at the same time. Then Vincent Wasilewski further developed and described the system, and Calvin, he used it a lot. I think you know his last polymath, he was the father of taxonomies. Then the big change happened with Luhmann's Zettelcasten, because this really brought it to a new level. First, all these stick boxes, they really captured atomic thoughts, and they were interconnected. He developed this for 45 years, tendering every day to really improve the system. And to say that he was productive would be an understatement. He wrote 400 articles and 70 books, and they are not just quantity, they're really rigorous, very precise books. So he had this way of numbering, but the numbering is actually guaranteeing that you can find it, but you can branch at every place. So you have just a few topics, and then you can branch at every place, and you can link every node to another node, to bibliographical index, or to an index of keywords. And that can happen in another interaction, and you can learn new things this way. So what is interesting through this history, now reaching to the idea of personal knowledge graphs, is decoupling. Every next stage brings more freedom, more decoupling. Of course, it is balanced with cohesion. In the beginning, when people organized knowledge, they tried that the knowledge mirrors the world. Not only for personal knowledge systems, but also for libraries. You go to a library, and maybe the rooms are organized as the 7 data of creation. And then later on, they discovered that they don't need to mirror the world. You can have your own organization of knowledge that is good for using this knowledge. That does not need to have the same order as the world. And the same for the index that you use. In fact, during the commonplace book, some people, different indexing systems were developed and improved, that some people advised to have 30, 40 pages in every commonplace book free just for the index. But that, of course, is limiting. And the first change was from bound books to separate slips, where you have more freedom. You can rearrange them, you can do other things, you can draw it from different places. Then, with Zettelcasten, another big decoupling storage, structure, and meaning. That brought new capabilities, and they are the reason that this is the first kind of personal knowledge system that actually has a very big deal. We'll talk about this later. And now, for the personal knowledge graph, interesting decoupling between data and application, where you have your data and different applications can bring functions so that you don't have any kind of lock-in in your owner of what you create. So, yeah, recently 1,464 works of Luhmann were counted at the archive. Most of them are lectures and drafts, but a huge amount of papers and books. So his Zettelcasten had 90,000 linked cards. So when he linked a card, this link also had a backlink from the card it was linked to. There was a famous cybernetician who was using a lot of backlinks. He had a lot of notebooks, very well maintained, and when he made a link to another place in another page, in another notebook, or the same notebook, that had backlinks back. Who was that?
Ashby?
Exactly. So we have a first winner. About quiz. People say it's incredibly good, but I think they exaggerate. So, yes, actually the node itself is not important. It takes its value from the network of links and backlinks. And already you're sensing what is going on here. It's open-endedness. The fact that you are not having a predefined schema, you can change your mind and make new classifications, a new linking, is very important to keep this alive. And to enable it to surprise you. And as Luhmann said, at some point it gets a life of its own, independent of its author. And that was not a mystical statement. So what I found is to, of course I'm biased because I'm working with knowledge graphs, enterprise knowledge graphs, that a systemic way to do that is to actually organize this as a personal knowledge graph, which basically is coming from an old frustration that I had with how personal computing developed. So you have certain clusters of functionality that at the end appeared as applications, spreadsheets, word processing, and so what we have is a situation now in all these advanced systems is we have silos. So every application is a silo, every document is a silo. So they actually keep this content together in a rigid way. I'm writing something using Word, but while I'm writing I cannot from Word search my email or my Kindle highlights or any other source that I want to link. And the same with emails, projects, and so on. And what is also important, they're called personal, but they're not actually personal because you are submitting to the understanding of a certain designer from the vendor of that system. So you cannot edit, you can customize, you cannot edit applications like you edit a document. And I find that a pity. Especially with the fact that introducing your brand, you cannot really maintain these links and other links everywhere. You have to submit to that particular structure that somebody decided for you. So the way personal knowledge graphs are defined, I'm using a general definition of knowledge graphs and just adding the word personal. So it's completely inclusive. A graph of data intended to accumulate and convey knowledge of the world, whose nodes represent entities of personal interest and whose edges represent the relationships between them. And there is implicit semantics, which I think is important. Now, how these things evolved, the first papers on personal knowledge graphs appeared in 2014, and then there was a research agenda in 2018, another paper by two authors. But something interesting happened during the Corona time. So I was following this a lot. I mean, just the tool marketing from personal knowledge management. And there were 4 or 5 applications up until 2020. And then suddenly there was an explosion. 70 applications with a lot of users, some of them thousands. And a big part of this application actually structured the data as a knowledge graph. That may be explained by people who are trying to match the complexity of the world. That may be explained by other ways. For example, they require some time to get used to and to actually configure them. And during Corona, we had more time. So, I don't know, but there was a big explosion, and I found that very, very interesting. And for me, it was important also that this supported a lot of use cases, the daily tasks, the project, the research, the events, writing, relationship management, learning, even presentations. Now, what people would do is they would use some presentation software to present. But like for projects or for research or for anything that actually I present from my personal knowledge graph. Currently what you see are not actually slides from they are a collection of nodes that appear in different contexts, and they're linked with different things in another context, where there can be 5, 20, or 100 other links that I can follow and find other things, or reuse them in a different setting, in a setting related to writing, a setting related to just finding new connections between facts that I have here. So here, every slide, every image, every bullet is a node in the graph connected with others. This one as well, of course. And what type of nodes there are? there like to-do items, notes, events, thoughts, messages, and so on. Of course, it's even more interesting that it could work as a hypergraph where the final connection is not between two nodes, but between several nodes. And even more interesting, some nodes can be active, they can contend with behavior, so linking them with some items, they can bring certain behavior, and you can have the output of that in another node that could appear in different contexts. And it becomes even more interesting when from these personal knowledge systems we go to interpersonal knowledge systems, right? They get connected. A lot of important problems can be solved this way. Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, came with this idea of solid, which is a way to give people control of their data and to do something against this trend. So instead of being a web of knowledge, the internet was actually became very centralized in a few platforms like Facebook and Google. So they are a threat to the democracy. There's a lot of misinformation and so on. So moving this way from personal to interpersonal knowledge, that is also enabled with this idea of moving from platforms to protocols. And at the end, we can reach this dream of having a web of thoughts. The internet started something that it was meant to read. You go and read something. Then this web 2 appeared, but you can also write, and actually most of the content is written by people. But it had two fundamental flaws. It is focused on now. So you have some string of messages that you add another, and that's it. You wouldn't find something important to continue 2 years ago, doing it with other things, and actually weave the whole web. It's linear, and it is focused on now. It cannot bring new knowledge to old knowledge and create relations. Maybe that was to some extent changed by some people who started using Twitter in a different way, not as something linear, but as a graph. And the reason it was convenient for that is because everything there is atomic, so it makes sense. But if it goes in the direction of weaving all this knowledge, this could be the web of thoughts that could bring different values to the world of knowledge. And last, about the viability of personal knowledge systems. It's not something really new, but it comes from the idea of what actually is writing as a process. There was a good comment here. Writing by itself is a cybernetic system, and Gunn wrote about it. So once you make a mark, this mark suggests something, and you start to interact with it, and there's a loop. There is a sprint between your writing and reading stuff, and that creates very interesting things. Basically, if you take the example of what Luhmann did, so when he was reading, he was writing notes, but these were not the notes that went to the Zettelcasten. So different kind of reading notes that changed the way he was switching from other things that he was reading about. And there were other loops. Every evening he would bring the new thoughts as new links or as new cards in his Zettelcasten. And then the same would actually be another loop linked with these two loops when he's writing books and papers. So basically, the system is not the tool itself, it's Zettelcasten cabinet or whatever. The system is something that emerges when you interact with that tool. And so there are two kinds of structural couplings. You're coupled with a certain system, not every one will work well, most of them are actually dead. But then, for some of them, from this interaction, something else could emerge, which is the actual system, and this is what you are structurally coupled with. And this is what we can call personal knowledge system, not the tool itself. This is what Luhmann wrote, that as a result of extensive work with this technique, a kind of second memory will arise, and all people with whom we can constantly communicate. And the fact that we can can get a life of its own, it can surprise you. It becomes a source of reliable serendipity because you can traverse it in different ways and discover things that you had no idea before from what you've learned or from what you have found by your next walk along this network. So this can be seen as a viable system from different perspectives. One could be the Luhmann's social system theory. This occurred to me at some point, but then it turned out that another author, Andreas Zettelcasten, already wrote a brilliant paper explaining how this is actually happening, how this creates variety, and how this works as a social system. But the concept of social systems of Luhmann requires that they are autopoietic. So in that sense, you have communications that communicate. And he's quite specific that communication is a unity of difference between utterance, information, and understanding. So in fact, the slips themselves are not communications. In fact, you can say that a written note does not contain information. Information happens when you read it. But this self-referential network actually brings it to life. It will take a lot of time to explain how it happens, and it's actually the basic of his theory. And then another perspective could be, it's again a separated perspective from the enactive cognitive science. So how the enactive cognitive is the most systemic branch of cognitive science that appeared from Francisco Varela, and currently people like Ezekiel Di Paolo, Dan Thompson, and many others are actively working in this area. So for them, the autonomy is a matter of operational closure, which is very specifically defined, and in that sense, it is not as strong condition as the autopoietic one, because it's not the relationships are not of production, but of some kind of dependency. And in fact, the way such a self-sustained system can emerge and can modulate interactions is already studied. For example, the last point is studying the emergence of such system when a user is interacting with a video game. Another way to look at it is something that I use in my work, three balances: autonomy and cohesion, stability and diversity, and exploration and exploitation. That is something that goes beyond use of models. It's more thinking habits. I'm not going to go through that now because we have not much. I thought that read you have more for. So now I'll be on. Yeah, and another way to look at this personal knowledge system as a viable system is, of course, the viable system model. Now, what you see here is the viable system model. This is the way I draw it. And this is no innovation on the model itself. It's just a different rendition. So I found that there are 5 problems with the diagrams of the model itself. And so about a decade ago, I started showing if it is the meta model fully corresponding to the text, but solving these 5 issues with the diagram itself. Anyway, I just wanted to put some image, and this is what I use. But the fact that we can use it, there's something more interesting about that. And Elena wrote a brilliant paper some time ago about personal VSM. Yeah. And I think it's time to revisit this, to revisit the idea of a personal VSM. And so what you see is actually that the structural coupling between the personal VSM and your personal knowledge system. Here people would actually put system and user. For me it's very funny because when somebody is claiming our software is user-centric, well, this is a misnomer. The user is always a user of, so the system is what they have in mind. Anyway, that's why I prefer to put person. So we have the person and the knowledge system that are coupled. And many interesting things can happen. I can give an example with a hobby of mine. So I was always drawn to music, but I never touched an instrument, and at some point I said, I should try. So when in my 40s, I started learning to to play a bass guitar. And I wanted to learn fast, of course. For that, my personal assistant helped a lot. And then I joined the band, and then we started making concerts. And so one day, before concert, the sound engineer called me and asked me, "Are you the bass player at Harmonica?" And I said yes. And then I realized that I changed my identity. I added one new identity. So in fact, I can talk from the perspective how interestingly the personal system 4 is coupled with one of the system 1s of your personal knowledge system, and using various techniques like programmable attention and spatial repetition. But the more important thing is that this change, this learning, actually went to system 5 because it added one more identity. Now I'm not just an advisor, consultant, researcher, and father, I'm also a bass player. And that also, in my own personal system, added another system 1. And this made me think how we go about our personal strategy. How do we decide things in a way that we can quickly zoom in and out and connect them to the different details of what we do and how they correspond to our goals and the things that we value. And also, if you see your personal ESM as a chessboard, how different actions change your position, like this change, which produced a new system 1. So, apart from something that can support this new kind of thinking, apart from something that can boost productivity, this could be a very interesting way to work with our personal strategy. And thank you.
Thank you very much.